All right, let's look at ending the American Revolution for just a second, and you'll notice this presentation has got a little copyright thing from the American Institute for History Ed, blah 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 blah. I used to work for them back in 2010, 2011, 2012. During those 3 years, so I did it for them. That company is no longer around, so that should not be any worry whatsoever. Just in case you were looking at it going, what in the heck is he doing? So let's start with the Yorktown campaign. If you have read the two chapters in my book, Kings Mountain and Cowpens, this gets us to the end of the war. And so that's going to be part one. And so we look at memorializing that campaign for just a second. Matter of fact, they just built a brand new big giant museum a few years ago over there. And most historians have been on tent on memorializing. We praise Washington's leadership, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, he gets his army down. He surrounds the British. Cornwallis, he traps him. And next thing you know, Cornwallis has to surrender. And the war is essentially over. But it causes us to lose sight of how close Cornwallis was to subduing Virginia. And once you start to see that, it's like, whoa, this American Revolution or this War for Independence was a really close one thing. And Nathaniel Greene's Southern Army is going to almost dissolve at a couple of points. It's not nearly as preordained as a lot of times we like to make it out to be. And it whitewashes a very dark side of the American victory. You've got, nearly 500,000 African Americans are going to remain in chattel slavery for about 800 years. And we're going to see a couple of things that happened to them during this campaign as well. So, who are the major players? Well, you got Lieutenant General Charles, the old Earl Cornwallis, right there. If you've seen the movie The Patriot, that is one rendition of him. Cornwallis is an extremely good commander. Sometimes he does not made out to be that way because he loses this campaign, but he really was. You got General Sir Henry Clinton there, who is Cornwallis's commander. He's the one who's going to tell him to go to Yorktown. He's nope, 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 go to Yorktown, protection of the British fleet. Cornwallis doesn't want to because he's kicking tail all in Virginia. He just about captured Governor Thomas Jefferson. Nope, got to go. So Cornwallis will follow his orders. Then you got General Nathaniel Greene. And Nathaniel Greene has got the Southern Army, and he's desperately trying to get Cornwallis to follow him into South Carolina and basically chase him all over the place. Cornwallis doesn't take that bait, so Nathaniel Greene's going to turn south, and he's going to end up trying to liberate South Carolina, places like 96, Camden, get to kind of root the British out of Charleston. And then there's the Marquis de Lafayette, who is going to come over from France, who he and George Washington are going to have an incredibly tight relationship, who is going to be down in Virginia fighting Benedict Arnold and Benedict Arnold's forces before the two major armies show up. And the last was going to be General George Washington, who I think we all know and are all familiar with. So, what's the prelude to that campaign? Cornwallis does make some fatal errors, people. After the Battle of the Cowpens, Cornwallis is going to try to chase Morgan and try to regain his prisoners, but his army is too slow. It's too heavy, has too much stuff. This logistical trail is too large. So at a place called Ramseur's Mill, which is near modern Lincoln High School. I mean, that's right there, Battleground Elementary, on that little hill back there between it and Lincoln Middle School. His army shows up there. There'd already been a battle at that stage earlier in the war between Patriots and Loyalists, and he's not gaining on Morgan's army, so he decides to burn his equipment. He keeps a couple of wagons for the wounded and to carry medicine, and everything else, including a lot of his own stuff, he throws in a big fire, and he tries to live off what I've called here a blighted land. You've already had Greene and Morgan's armies parading around it, taking everything they can. So his army is going to be in rough shape, and it wears them down. And his army will get smaller and smaller and weaker, and that really is going to spell the death knell for it. Whereas it looks like Greene and Morgan are running, in reality, they're getting stronger as they move, and Cornwallis's army is getting weaker. And so they're going to race to the Dan River. Now, of course, that bridge was not there in 1780 or 1781. That's a modern rendition of it, but that's roughly the crossing point of the Dan. And so it gets in a foot race with Greene. Greene's now taken over, combined the two armies, and they're on the move. And Greene understands terrain. Remember that terrain. Well, he understands topography as well. And Greene had been the quartermaster of the Patriot Army for years. And so he's got supplies everywhere along the route he's going to take. And he has stripped that countryside. And so he's gathering his stuff where there's nothing left for Cornwallis to get. And so Greene's army wins that race. And they get all the boats from up and down the dang Dan River for as far as you can see. He gets all those boats and he gets them and takes them across the other side with him. So Cornwallis has to wait until he's able to ford the river or literally walk across it. I don't know about y'all, but that's a pretty cool little trick. So Nathanael Greene is very sophisticated in the way he moves his army and the way he's playing cat and mouse with Cornwallis. So they'll eventually end up at a place called Guilford Courthouse, which is near modern Greensboro. Okay, and of course I'm short-circuiting a lot of the movement, and that's okay. And Dan Morgan, by this point in time, he has got, they call it, most historians call it sciatica, but I really and truly believe he has got a bulged disc in his back. It presents some of the same things with the way it comes and goes and some of the actions that cause it to hurt. It seems like a bulged disc that I had, almost 30 years ago. And so Morgan's going to have to go home to Virginia to recuperate. We'll see him. He'll show up again during the Whiskey Rebellion. But Greene tells Morgan he's going to use his same basic three-lined defense in depth that he used at the Cowpens. And Morgan tells him if your militia will fight, then you're going to win. If they don't, then you're going to lose. But Greene, great strategist, not a great tactician. And he ends up spacing his lines too far apart. They can't be mutually supporting. And so anyway, Greene ends up losing that battle. But my goodness, does he bleed Cornwallis's army white. Was a bug out about it called Long Bloody and obstinate about that battle, but he basically bleeds it. It's a very Pyrrhic victory for Cornwallis because another such victory would ruin his army, and he knows it. And so Greene leaves the field, leaves Cornwallis in command of it, but Cornwallis knows that he can't keep doing this. So Cornwallis is going to turn toward Virginia. Okay? Greene's going to go towards South Carolina, trying to get him to chase him, knowing his army's wearing out. So Cornwallis is going to eventually end up in Yorktown by way of Wilmington, which if you know the geography of the state, that makes no sense, but we're going to try to show you. So what's this timeline? So by April of 1781, Marquis de Lafayette sent into Virginia to oppose this little invasion by Benedict Arnold. Cornwallis in that summer of 17 is going to march through Virginia, and he's going to go to Virginia. He's going to turn around. He's going to go down North Carolina. He's going to Wilmington. He's going to turn around, march right back through that godforsaken area of North Carolina in the heat of the summer. I ain't doing that in a car with air conditioning. So he gets to Yorktown, and he holds his support for the British fleet. Now, when he's going through there, he's going through Virginia. He's able, like I said, quite literally, Banastre Tarleton almost captures Governor Jefferson. His men are coming in the front door. Jefferson runs out the back. So, but he's ordered there. It is not where Cornwallis wants to be. And then in September, the French Navy arrives in the Chesapeake, and they finally convince George Washington, pack your stuff up and move south. And within just a little over a month, Cornwallis will eventually surrender as he's hemmed in there, and the French Navy actually wins a battle for once and actually runs the British Navy off. So this is about we're talking about going separate ways here. And like I said, Greene moves his army into South Carolina. He tries to get Cornwallis to chase him. Cornwallis won't. Cornwallis moves into Virginia. Then he turns around and moves south. This is physically wearing his army out. But the idea is if he can get to Wilmington, there is the protection there of the British fleet, and he can rest and refit his army, which makes a lot of sense. But it's not going to be enough to recuperate all the things that have happened to it over the past year. Yep. There's one going that way, one going this way, one going the other way. And then Cornwallis taking his happy self all the way down to Wilmington. But Cornwallis does have an epiphany. He figures out, and I've alluded to this in at least one presentation before, or one lecture before, is you can't trust the loyalist, the Southern loyalist. And you can see here, this is from his memoirs. Our experience has shown that their numbers are not so great as has been fully represented, and their friendship is only passive. They're like Kansas City Chiefs fans. When did they start showing up? When they started winning. Same thing happens. It happened with the New England Patriots. When did people become Patriots fans? When they were winning with Tom Brady. Same thing here. When do people become loyalist fans? When they were winning. Okay? So what happens is the British Army's winning some battles, but when they move on, the Patriots simply come back. And when they come back, they control the countryside. And as there's no rising there, there's fears of reprisals. I mean, that's really going to be the story right there. So what happens is people are going to adopt a wait and see approach. Hey, they're here. It looks all kinds of good, but how long are they going to stay? Right? And then, that's one of those things where capturing towns and setting up these outposts was a strategy for doing this, kind of pacify that countryside. The idea to take the war to the people, but there's just not enough British to do this effectively. Oh, and make the Army stand mobile to guard against guerrilla warfare. We saw that in Charlotte. Why do you think the professional team's called the Hornets? Remember, that's when Cornwallis first enters Charlotte during September of 1780. His army is plagued by militia attacks on their foraging parties and this, and Lord Cornwallis said it was akin to sitting naked upon a hornet's nest. It's really a slow bleed, death by 1,000 cuts sort of thing. So his army's got to stay mobile to guard against that foolishness. So he moves into Virginia, and Virginia is going to be a great supply base for Greene's army. Again, this guy's the quartermaster. He understands the concept of beans and bullets. The army moves on its stomach, and you've got to have things to shoot. And so what happens when he gets into Virginia, he allows them to destroy anything that would be useful to the Patriot cause. I mean, hey, that's fine. That makes sense. William Tecumseh Sherman, we're going to see him do that in 1864 and 1865 down in Georgia and South Carolina. But also, it keeps his army on the move. And that means these partisans or guerrillas or militia or whatever you want to call them this week can't set up base against him. Now, in Rapids in Virginia, he's almost unchecked. I mean, Lafayette's little army, they can't come to grips with him because if they do, they're going to be destroyed. So it's constantly moving. And, stick and move a little bit, as Muhammad Ali would say. But there's no real hope of checking him. And then one of the things that Cornwallis does that was absolutely brilliant is he encourages any slaves to follow him. And so, because if the slaves weren't on the plantations aren't producing things, they're not helping the Patriot cause. And so at the beginning of the Yorktown campaign, they have about 12,000, we think, with his army. Now, things are going to happen with them, and that's not going to be with him at the end. He's successful in like I got here, burning and looting and pillaging and plundering the population. Like, again, I talked about Tarleton capturing Governor Jefferson. And when you go back to those slaves, there is a great article. God, who did Dr. Irwin write that for? But it's called Freedom, When Freedom Wore a Red Coat. Matter of fact, he's producing a new book on that right now that is about this very incident. And again, like I told you, that number, that's what we think. I mean, these things get revised from time to time, so don't take 12,000 as a hard and fast number. Now, Clinton's going to issue that fateful order. I've already alluded to it, okay? Their relationship soured hard when Clinton left and went back to New York and left Cornwallis in Georgia, South Carolina. That relationship soured in ways that we look at it as like it's almost soap opera-esque. And Cornwallis's victories and his actions in the Carolinas, as he was winning, it looked to Clinton like, oh my God, they're going to get rid of me and put him in charge. Well, they ain't nothing worse than a scared general like that. And then Cornwallis, for his part, is not communicating with Clinton. I mean, it's just a stinking mess. And so what happens is Clinton eventually orders Cornwallis to take that army to the coast and establish a base for the fleet, Yorktown. So Cornwallis does. And you can see this picture over on the right-hand side, and you're like, what is that business? That's smallpox. And some of you, if you're not my age, I'm 53 right now here in 2024, and I'm one of the last groups to have the smallpox vaccine. I don't think they give it out anymore. I mean, I got a little pock mark on my left shoulder over here that shows it. Hopefully it worked. Who knows? But as Cornwallis is retreating back to the coast very slowly, kind of in a got his lip poked out sort of thing, burning houses and plundering and having a big time. When the slaves that had got smallpox, he had left them on the sides of the roads. He's spreading smallpox throughout the community. This is at a time when, we know that Washington, he does inoculate his army at Valley Forge, but that's brand new stuff right there. I mean, you could consider this like during the COVID pandemic. Hey, he's leaving COVID on the side of the road for everybody to get. That's what it's looked on as. I mean, this is a brilliant maneuver if you're being ordered to go to this coast. This is a brilliant thing to do militarily. Now, humanely, it's not. It's such a nice thing. So when we start looking at the military movements, Lafayette, he's gathering his forces. He's pretty good. He's a good little commander. He's got about 5,000 men of all arms, but don't look at that number and think they're all first rate, combatants. Uh, um, but what he's doing is he's leading our man Cornwallis, making it look like a retreat and even a defeat. If you've read the chapter on Cowpens, that's exactly what Dan Morgan did, except he wasn't quite setting it up with some of the elaborate machinations that Lafayette was. And Cornwallis, for his part, wants everybody to think that all of Virginia is under his control. So they're skirmishing all over here. These two armies are just kind of moving around and doing this, and it looks like Lafayette's retreating, and here comes Cornwallis. He's moving to the Williamsburg, Yorktown area. So Lafayette devises a trap. Okay, again, this guy, he's something else. Um, if the French fleet can show up and the French fleet can ward off the British Navy, we can catch them and besiege them and defeat them. Okay? So his idea now is not to use his army to fight Cornwallis, just simply to keep Cornwallis from going anywhere and keeping him right there. Come on, French, get your fleet here. We keep him there. Washington, you slip down from up in New York, and by God, we've got him. And we can take this whole army off the chessboard. Okay, oh, there it is. So that was Lafayette's plan. He springs the trap. So in August of 1781, the French fleet arrives, and it's not quite that simple, but it's good enough for our purposes here. Okay, and so now, if you are Cornwallis and you look out one day and those ships you see are not flying a British flag, you know you're in trouble. And so he's in a predicament. And so what does he do? He starts to build entrenchments and he starts to build fortifications. It ain't going to matter, but that's what you do, right? The French are going to land part of an army. The ships are anchored in the river. The British fleet's scattered and gone. If you're Cornwallis now, you're like, oh, poo, they got me. So what are his options? He could attack them and scatter Lafayette's forces, then escape northward, and that's what Banastre Tarleton's wanting to do. Now everybody's wanting a piece of Tarleton at this stage. He could defend his entrenchments, and then that way, if he loses, he can blame it on Clinton. You told me to do this, and that's exactly what's going to happen. That's why Cornwallis's reputation is not really tarnished by this defeat. And since neither option is good, one of them, if he fights and escapes and whatnot, he's disobeyed orders. The other is to ensure defeat if he obeys them, but Clinton's his superior. Cornwallis is, I'm very sympathetic to the man right here. I'm sympathetic to him in general during this war, but I'm very sympathetic to him. If I do what I'm commanded to, I'm going to lose. If I do what I think is the best option, then I'm disobeyed orders and I can be court-martialed. Nothing good here. Nothing good here for the good Lord Earl. So the decision, he decides he's going to try to break out, but it's too late. Too late. And so he's getting that plan going, and he's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to break out of these entrenchments. We're going to escape north. I don't care if they do something bad to me. But then Clinton sends him a letter. No, we're going to help. We're going to help. We're going to send you some stuff. We're going to send you some soldiers. We're going to send the fleet. We're going to run the French off. Oh, and by the way, Washington's coming. This is not the thing you want to get. So Cornwallis decides to stay. He's going to await those reinforcements now because he's been told. The decision got made for him. And I've got here, that's not a good plan because the tighter those lines get, the lower that the supplies run. And you can go see where those lines were down there at the Yorktown battlefield today. It's pretty cool. They've reconstructed some of the lines. It's kind of neat. But so what happens is Cornwallis has got when supplies start running low, you get rid of the non-essential. First of being camp followers, as you see a drawing or an image of there, what he would have said to get rid of Negroes or his African Americans that were in there. That's the term he used in his own correspondence. Children, of camp followers and whatnot, they got to go. These people, pack your stuff and get out. Okay, militarily, this is what you should do. In a human sense, we're causing more misery. It's a nice little rendition here of the lines around Yorktown and so in the York River. Many years ago, I had a student, I kind of drew it up on the whiteboard. This is before PowerPoint. And she raised her hand and I said, yes, what you got? She said, why didn't he just swim away? I said, you've never seen the York River, have you? It's impossible. And so here's another little piece of it right there with color this time. Now, there's some other happenings going on. First, Cornwallis is ringing his positions with artillery. He took some guns off of the what few British ships were not able to get out of the harbor. He took some of those. This thing's not an easy nut to crack, okay? But the French, for their part, they kept wanting to leave. Oh, it's hurricane season. Oh, it's hurricane season. But they were able to maintain their control, and that's the key. Because if the British fleet can get in, the game's up. All right. So Lafayette, his forces, there's the French land. He's got 5,500 regulars. This isn't just militia. He got 5,500 regulars. That's a big army. And he's got 3,000 militia, and he's got more people. Lafayette's doing some stuff here. I mean, he's in charge of a big force, and Washington has not got there yet. This is Lafayette holding Cornwallis in place. And then Washington arrives on the scene. I don't know why in the world that got a little weird behind there. But look at there, September the 14th, Washington arrives in Williamsburg, and his army is behind him. They're marching behind him. And so he orders up heavy siege guns. Boom, let's start throwing big lead. Let's start throwing explosive shot on the British. And the British, for their part, they're kind of spooked by being formally surrounded because this is not something they're used to. And so they're giving up series of trenches and they're moving back and forth. And it looks remarkably like what we're going to see at Vicksburg and Petersburg in the American Civil War, or on the Western Front during World War I, except, without repeating weapons. So there are going to be some small accidents. And no, that's not one of my children up there. I found that picture on the internet. So they've got these little attacks, little spoiling attacks, just enough to keep the British off balance, enough to they can't rest and they don't know what you're going to do. And the whole time they're doing this, supplies are running low, and Washington's army is creeping closer and closer. They're digging new lines in under cover of night. I mean, if you're the British, this is spooky. And so then there's a gigantic cannonade. Washington's going to let loose with this barrage, and it sweeps things in front of it. It really and truly looks like something off the Western Front. And if you're the British, it's like, how in the devil did these people, this army of a rabble, if you're going to watch that bad movie, The Patriot, I like the imagery. How did they do this? So there's this desperation. Where's our fleet? Where's the rest of our army? Where's this? Where's that? Where's the other? What's going on here? Who's going to help us? And Washington keeps moving those lines closer day after day after day. He's in the driver's seat. And so finally there's going to be an assault to take part of the lines. And so they get part of the British works, is what they're called. And at night, what you start to see now is British regulars deserting because they know this thing's about up. And so if you're Washington, what do? Do you let off? No. He puts the hammer down. He puts his foot on the gas and continues to pound those positions. And finally, on October the 17th, 1781, the British ask for a parley and begin to surrender. Now, a lot of times in a textbook, this is seen as the end of the American Revolution. It is not. The Treaty of Paris is not until 1783. There's still military actions until the end of 1782 at the minimum. The British don't leave Charleston until December of 1782, but this is the last giant or last really big military action. Now, supposedly, the British Army's band is going to play a tune called The World Turned Upside Down, and it goes something like this. If ponies rode men and grass ate cows, if summer were spring and the other way around, then all the world will be upside down. Did they play it? I don't know, but I hope they did because they should have. Because quite literally, a third-rate colonial nation has overthrown the most powerful empire on the face of the planet. And so what have we done here? We're a couple of ways of thinking about history, and I like to use it with this. The story that I just told you, you're not going to find in one single text, okay? Now, if you want to read all of these, knock yourself out. You're going to find pieces of it in every single one of them. We've tried to bust a few myths of the American Revolution because, well, hey, that's just what we do, right? I talk about demonstrating a couple of different lecture styles and objectives. I mean, part of it, we go back to the previous lecture on the early years of the war, some of the different points of view and all that kind of stuff. But here's kind of the fun thing. History is a fluid discipline, and it's always open to interpretation. Again, Dr. Greg Irwin from Temple, when he comes out with When Freedom Wore a Red Coat, that's an element that if I was familiar with it, it was dormant when he first sent me his article, and I'm like, whoa. That's another element to add into it here. So that's what history does. It doesn't change, but the way we look at it tends to do so. Now, we got a last part. And the question is, why did America win that war for independence? We got to look at that. If we don't do that, I'm not doing my job. And we look at British strengths and weaknesses. And first of all, we look at their weaknesses, and part of them are behind my head here, but that's okay. Their generals being overconfident. Well, I mean, they should have been, all right? I mean, this was a great military machine that they had. But being overconfident and not taking stock of your enemy in a very pragmatic way ends up getting you beat, much like what happened here. That British Army, that logistical tail, is a long way from home. I mean, today we can get supplies and things like that to a military unit anywhere in the world in a matter of hours. There, it was a matter of weeks, if not months. I mean, America's big. It's big. It's not very populous, but good gosh, is it big? And it's going to be hard to subdue. That population is scattered over God's creation. Especially when Washington adopts this Faustian strategy of, man, we'll trade. You take Philadelphia. Usually you take an enemy's capital, they quit. America did. Go ahead and take it. We'll just move somewhere else. Okay? And, the British never had the loyalty of the people. They never understood what Americans wanted. There's an old phrase, if somebody's sitting on the fence and you better know which side they're going to fall on before you push them. And the British never understood that. Those are their weaknesses. Those are well known. Let's see what their strengths are. I mean, they got about 7.5 million people, give or take, at the time, because compared to 2.5 million of us, their navy is massive. As a matter of fact, it's going to be the best navy in the world until World War II, when America becomes that. Our army is the best in the world. There's 50,000 British and 30,000 German hirelings and 30,000 loyalists. Now let's put all that together. That's 110,000. That's massive numbers of troops that they have. The colonists are not going to be able to utilize that many in that way. Okay, and the British were much wealthier than America. I mean, it's still looking at this on the face of it, on paper, the British should win this thing 10 out of 10 times, but they don't, and they didn't. So what are America's strengths and weaknesses? Well, I'll start with the weaknesses again. Colonies are badly organized, and they're going to be badly organized after the war is over. They're never going to be able to keep their full capabilities on display. Okay, well, there you go. Limited military supplies, and they never could solve that. Though by the end of the war, it was a lot better than it was during the beginning and the middle. Okay. So the British have a massive industrial base. America did not. And that mixed American military system relies on some unreliable elements, particularly militia. And that's the only way they can get on an equal footing with the British. But it's kind of like sometimes I'll use the Panthers again. They have an offensive line, but it's not the offensive line you want. But in terms of strength, the American political leaders are strong and they're good. Your Franklins, your Adams, even your Jeffersons. They're incredible. Okay, military leaders such as Washington and Greene, they're good. The Marquis de Lafayette, Daniel Morgan, they're fantastic. Okay, and that's one of those things you're just like, that's a stroke of luck that they were there at that time. Then the Americans are fighting a defensive war. I mean, those people are coming to take something from us. That is a huge motivator. Then France, and to a lesser extent Spain and the Netherlands, are going to help with money and ships, and there's going to be some recognition there that makes it legitimate. That's in terms of your mind, that's big. And the colonists believe they're fighting for that moral cause. I mean, the term freedom and tyranny are words. Again, if you remember last week's lecture, freedom and tyranny are very real to these people. Okay, and they think they're fighting for that cause of freedom. So why did we win? Well, the usual suspects. I mean, you can pick up a book of all kinds of stuff, or you can use your friend the Google, and you can see all of these things right here. You can see all of them. Okay. It doesn't tell the whole story. My question is, how accurate is that? Well, the Patriots did fight on their own terrain. The French did send this, and the British public did indeed lose their enthusiasm for the war. I mean, eventually King George is going to be like, we got to stop this business. Yeah, there is that. Oops. Well, darn it, it won't let me go back. It won't let me go back. So let me give you my take here, and that's what I'm trying to get to anyhow. And this is my take, and this is not going to be a question on like like a test or a quiz. Okay, I don't believe in doing that. But you look at here, and my thing is, I believe that the British never realized what they were up against. They never, until it was way too late. They never knew what was going on here. They're like, whoa, yeah, it's more than they thought. And then, you look at the American military, we avoided a whole lot of decisive battles. Why? Because if you lose them, then your army is destroyed. So Washington was great at it. Greene would fight them, but he would never get himself so intertwined that he couldn't extract his army. And one of his famous phrases is, we fight, get beat, we rise to fight again. That's the thing. The American army stays in the field. And the British side. It's kind of like fighting Rocky in some of those movies. You're like, would you just quit and just lay down? When Mick tells him, just lay down, just stay down. No, the American army will not stay down. It keeps getting up. And that militia, it does harass the loyalists. Okay, it's good on the battlefield in certain things, like at the Cowpens or at Kings Mountain, but it's even better at keeping the loyalists from forming and coming out in decisive numbers. It's even better at that. And so the failure to suppress that insurgency in a meaningful way, with the mess going on in Iraq and Afghanistan today, you will be shocked at the number of American officers, especially Special Forces officers, who are getting their masters and working on other advanced degrees that are using that unconventional warfare and insurgency model as part of it. So there's been a whole lot of modern interest in this particular aspect of the battle, of the war for independence. And then lastly, Americans maintain control of the crucial pieces. Okay, they want the crucial pieces, and British are fixated on towns and forts, where Americans like the countryside. And if you maintain the countryside, you maintain the people. And if you maintain the people, then the British can't decisively defeat you, or at least that's the idea at that time, and it worked out very well. So if we roll all of this together, what do we get? Here you go. The American Revolution was an affair run on a shoestring. Again, that's how you know I wrote that. And the British did not realize the resolve of the Americans until it was too late, and it was. American military leaders were skillful enough to maintain their armies in the field. I don't think they had a grand strategy to do that. If they came up one day and said, here's what we're going to do. No, I don't think that's what it was at all. I think it evolved, and I think they understood this is the only way we can survive. So it's out of desperation, not out of planning. The militias and partisan organizations control the countryside. And again, that's absolutely crucial to the mindset of the people. And England's enemies, enemy, my enemy is my friend. Here you go. And even with all of that, up until Cornwallis goes to Yorktown, up until that moment, he goes to Yorktown and stays there. The British were so close to ending this thing. It's not funny. It's one of the great what ifs in world history. Okay, what if Cornwallis doesn't go to Yorktown? That could be a mess. But he did go to Yorktown, and he did follow orders because he is a good soldier, and ended up, boom, getting hemmed in, losing, and thereby virtually putting an end to the war for independence. So again, thanks to some people here like Dr. Irwin up at Temple, Walter Edgar down in South Carolina, Bert Davis's book, The Campaign That Won America, which is really my first professional study of that. I mean, Bert Davis does a great job. So anyway, so there's that. Now we have ended the American Revolution. We can move on to the post-war part.